What this luminous traveler revealed to me about the ancient paths of Nazareth will forever change how you understand the connection between heaven and earth. Before this story ends, you'll discover why the spiritual emptiness you've been feeling isn't your fault, and you'll understand that the answers you've been searching for have been written in your soul since before you were born. If you're ready to hear about an encounter that bridges 2,000 years of forgotten wisdom with the struggles of your modern life, subscribe to Stories of Light and activate the bell. Because what happened to me, Dr. Rebecca Chen, a 42-year-old history teacher from Santa Fe, New Mexico, will show you that some truths transcend time itself, and some beings never stop walking among us, even when we've forgotten how to see them. Now, let me tell you how my carefully constructed world shattered on a November night that felt like every other night, until it wasn't. November 14th, 2024, 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was grading papers when my desk lamp flickered, and I glanced at my phone to check if a storm was approaching. The weather app showed clear skies, no wind advisories, no reason for the sudden electrical disturbance that made the light pulse 3 times before settling back to normal. I lived alone in a small adobe-style house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, where the high desert meets the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The isolation had been intentional after my divorce 3 years earlier. My ex-husband David had left me for a younger colleague, and the betrayal had carved out something deep inside me that I'd never quite managed to fill. Teaching ancient history to disinterested teenagers and coming home to an empty house had become my entire existence. That night, I was working on my lesson plan about the historical Jesus, the human figure, not the divine one. I'd always approached religion academically, clinically, keeping a professional distance from faith claims while focusing on archaeological evidence and historical context. It was safer that way, less complicated than belief. The second flicker came at 11:51 p.m. This time, not just my desk lamp, but every light in the house pulsed in perfect synchronization. My laptop screen wavered. The refrigerator in the kitchen hummed at a frequency I'd never heard before, and then silence. Complete, absolute silence. The kind of quiet that makes you suddenly aware of how much ambient noise modern life produces and how unsettling it is when all of that disappears at once. I stood up from my desk, my heart beginning to race. The rational part of my brain, the part with a PhD in ancient Mediterranean history, was already forming explanations: power grid fluctuation, transformer malfunction, explainable electrical phenomena. But my body knew something different. Every hair on my arms stood on end. My skin felt hypersensitive, as though the air itself had become charged with something I couldn't name. Through my living room window, I saw the light. It wasn't like headlights, it wasn't like lightning. It was a soft, golden white luminescence that seemed to be emanating from somewhere beyond my property line, in the direction of the small arroyo that ran behind my house. The light pulsed gently, rhythmically, like breathing, like something alive. "Call 911, my rational mind insisted. "There's been an accident. Someone needs help." But I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic entirely, that this wasn't an accident. This was intentional. This was meant for me. I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight, though I could already see that the flashlight would be unnecessary. The golden light was bright enough to illuminate the sagebrush and juniper trees behind my house with an otherworldly clarity. Everything looked sharper, more vivid, as though the world had suddenly shifted into a higher resolution. The November air was cold against my face as I walked toward the light. My breath formed small clouds that glowed faintly in the strange radiance. The desert at night is never truly quiet. There are always insects, nocturnal birds, the rustle of small animals. But now, there was only the sound of my footsteps on the hard-packed earth and the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. As I approached the arroyo, the light grew more intense, but never harsh. It was warm, welcoming, impossible to look away from. And then I saw the source. In the center of the dry creek bed, approximately 30 yards from where I stood, was a figure. Not human. Definitely not human. The being stood approximately 7 feet tall, though height seemed somehow irrelevant in its presence. Its form was humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head, but composed of light that was somehow solid, somehow present in a way that defied every scientific principle I'd spent my adult life studying. The figure glowed with that same golden white radiance, but I could see definition, the outline of what might be called clothing, or might simply be the way the light organized itself into familiar patterns to make my mind feel safer. My legs stopped moving. I couldn't have run if I'd wanted to, not from fear, but from a paralyzing sense of awe. Every instinct in my body was torn between 2 impossible responses: flee from the absolute unknown, or walk closer to something that felt inexplicably like home. The being turned its luminous head toward me, and I felt rather than heard its attention settle on me with the weight of immense, gentle awareness. "Do not be afraid, Rebecca." The words didn't come through my ears, they resonated somewhere deeper, in my chest, in my mind, in some part of me that I'd never known existed. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was everything and nothing, the sound of wind and water and the first breath of morning, all compressed into words that bypassed sound entirely and went straight to meaning. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed. My mind was racing through every rational explanation, hallucination brought on by stress, some kind of neurological event, a vivid dream I hadn't realized I'd fallen into. But my body knew the truth with a certainty that made denial impossible. This was real. This was happening, and nothing in my carefully constructed understanding of the world had prepared me for this moment. I have traveled far to meet you here, tonight, in this moment, not because you are special among all humans, but because you are ready. You have been asking questions without knowing you were asking them. Your soul has been calling out, and I have come to answer. My knees were shaking. I managed to whisper, "What are you?" The being's light pulsed warmly, and I felt something like gentle amusement mixed with infinite patience. "I am a traveler. I have walked many paths, in many times, on many worlds. Once, long ago by your measure, I walked the dusty roads of ancient Nazareth. I witnessed teachings that would change the course of your world. I am a messenger, a friend, a being of light who has not forgotten the covenant between earth and the infinite." My breath caught. "Nazareth? You mean you were there? When the one you call Jesus walked among humanity? Yes, I was there. Not as savior, not as prophet, but as witness, as one who understood what he was showing you. And that is why I have come tonight, Rebecca, because you have spent your life studying the historical man while carefully avoiding the spiritual truth. And now your soul is starving." The words hit me like a physical blow. Tears suddenly blurred my vision, though I hadn't realized I was crying. "Come," the being gestured with a hand made of living light. "Come, sit with me. There are things you need to remember." Dr. Rebecca Chen had built her entire adult identity on the foundation of rigorous academic discipline and emotional self-control. At 42, she was considered one of the most promising young scholars in ancient Mediterranean history, with 2 published books, a tenure-track position at Santa Fe Preparatory Academy, and a reputation for bringing historical rigor to the often romanticized study of early Christianity. But beneath the impressive credentials and the carefully maintained professional persona, Rebecca was drowning in a kind of existential emptiness that no amount of academic achievement could fill. She had been raised in a mixed household. Her father was a third-generation Chinese-American atheist, a physicist who believed that the universe could be fully explained through mathematics and observable phenomena. Her mother had been a lapsed Catholic from New Mexico, carrying generations of Hispanic Catholic tradition in her bones, but increasingly alienated from institutional religion as she grew older. Rebecca had grown up in the space between these two worldviews, belonging fully to neither. As a child, she'd felt something. In churches, when her mother took her on the rare occasions that guilt or loneliness drove them there, young Rebecca would feel a stirring in her chest, a sense of something vast and loving and very close, like being held in invisible arms. But her father's voice was always there afterward, explaining away the experience. Endorphins, cultural conditioning, the psychological need for a parent figure projected onto cosmic scale. By the time she reached high school, Rebecca had learned to suppress those feelings, to trust only what could be measured and proven. She excelled at academics precisely because facts were safe. Dates, artifacts, linguistic analysis, archaeological evidence, these things didn't require faith. They didn't break your heart. They didn't leave you. She met David Chen during her doctoral program at UC Berkeley. He was a fellow history student specializing in East Asian studies, and he represented everything she thought she wanted: intelligent, rational, ambitious, emotionally contained. Their relationship was more intellectual partnership than romance, but Rebecca had convinced herself that this was a mature approach to love. Passion was unstable, logic was reliable. They married in a simple civil ceremony when she was 31. No religious elements, no spiritual language, just a legal contract between two rational adults who respected each other's work. The marriage worked, in a functional sense, for nearly 8 years. They co-authored papers, they supported each other's careers, they maintained separate but compatible lives in the same house. But there was no warmth, no depth, no soul connection. Rebecca told herself this was normal, that romantic notions of deep spiritual partnership were fantasy, that this practical arrangement was the best anyone could reasonably expect. Then, 3 years ago, David told her he'd fallen in love with Melissa, a 28-year-old visiting professor from Taiwan. "I didn't know I was capable of feeling this way," he'd said. And the words had destroyed Rebecca more thoroughly than infidelity ever could. He hadn't just cheated, he'd revealed that what he felt for Melissa was something he'd never felt for Rebecca, something she'd convinced herself didn't exist. The divorce was civilized, painless on paper. They divided their assets with the same intellectual detachment they'd brought to everything else. David moved to Taiwan with Melissa. Rebecca kept the house in Santa Fe and threw herself even deeper into her work. But something broke open inside her that wouldn't seal shut again. She would wake at 3 a.m. with a pressure in her chest, a grief that wasn't about David, but about something much larger, a lifetime of shutting down the parts of herself that couldn't be quantified or proven. The rational voice that had guided her for 40 decades suddenly sounded hollow, cold, insufficient. Her work suffered. The lectures she gave about historical Jesus felt dishonest somehow, as though she were describing a photograph without deliberately ignoring that the photograph was of a living person who had loved and hurt and believed in something beyond material existence. Her students seemed bored, and she couldn't blame them. She was boring herself. 6 months before the encounter, Rebecca's mother died suddenly of a stroke. They had never been particularly close. Her mother had been a quiet woman, worn down by a difficult marriage and a faith she could never quite hold on to or let go of. But at the funeral, Rebecca's Aunt Maria pulled her aside. "Your mother wanted you to have this," Maria said, pressing a small wooden cross in Rebecca's hand. It was old, roughly carved, the kind of folk art sold at markets throughout New Mexico. "She bought it when you were born. She was going to give it to you when you got confirmed, but, well, that never happened." Rebecca stared at the cross in her palm, feeling nothing and everything simultaneously. She put it in a drawer at home, unable to throw it away, but equally unable to look at it. The weeks after her mother's funeral were marked by strange dreams. She would find herself walking through desert landscapes, searching for something she couldn't name. Sometimes there was a figure in the distance, never close enough to see clearly, but present, watching, waiting. She would wake from these dreams with tears on her face and no memory of why she'd been crying. Her therapist suggested grief counseling. Her doctor checked her hormone levels and recommended exercise. Everyone had explanations, but none of them touched the real problem. Rebecca Chen, who had spent her entire adult life studying ancient spiritual movements from a safe academic distance, was experiencing a spiritual crisis she had no language for and no framework to understand. She began staying up later, ostensibly to grade papers, but really to avoid sleep and the dreams that came with it. She stopped seeing friends, she declined invitations to faculty gatherings. Her house became simultaneously a sanctuary and a prison, safe because it was empty of other people's expectations, suffocating because it was empty of everything else. On the night of November 14th, she'd been grading papers about Pontius Pilate, marking student essays that regurgitated basic facts without any sense of the human drama, the political complexity, the spiritual weight of that historical moment. One student had written, "Jesus was killed because he threatened Roman authority and Jewish religious leaders. His death was a historical event that some people believe was also a spiritual event." Rebecca stared at that sentence for a long time. Some people believe, as though belief were optional, as though the question of whether there was more to existence than material cause and effect was just a matter of personal preference, like choosing chocolate over vanilla. "What do I believe?" she whispered to her empty house. "What do I actually believe?" And in that moment, in that question, something had shifted. Some door inside her that had been locked for decades had cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to get through. That's when her desk lamp had flickered for the first time. I sat down across from the being, if sat is even the right word for the way my body lowered itself onto the hard ground of the arroyo while my mind floated somewhere between terror and transcendence. The golden light surrounding the figure was warm, not just physically but emotionally, as though the light itself carried comfort. "You are afraid," the being observed gently. "Your mind is creating explanations at tremendous speed, hallucination, dream, breakdown, but your heart knows differently." I nodded, not trusting my voice. My hands were shaking. "May I show you something?" the being asked. "Not with words, but with experience. I cannot force this, you must choose." "What kind of experience?" My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "A sharing of memory, a vision. I will show you where I walked, who I witnessed, what I learned. You will see through my consciousness, feel through my awareness. It will not harm you, but it will change you. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you know, you cannot unknow." I thought about my life, the careful construction of intellectual defenses, the deliberate avoidance of anything that couldn't be proven, the decades of choosing safety over truth. I thought about my mother's small wooden cross in my dresser drawer. I thought about waking up every day to the same hollow routine, teaching about passion and faith and human transformation while feeling none of it myself. "I'm tired of not knowing," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'm tired of the emptiness. If this is madness, at least it's something other than the slow death I've been living." The being's light pulsed with what I could only interpret as approval, perhaps even joy. Then breathe with me, Rebecca. Slow your mind. Open your heart. What I am about to share with you is not doctrine. It is not religion. It is simply truth as I witnessed it, memory as I carry it. You will interpret through your own understanding, and that interpretation will be uniquely yours. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The cold desert air, the warm light on my skin, the absolute impossibility of this moment, and the absolute reality of it happening anyway. I am going to touch your consciousness now, the being communicated. You may feel a moment of disorientation, and then the arroyo disappeared. Not gradually, not like waking from a dream, but instantly, as though reality itself had changed channels. I was no longer in New Mexico. I was standing on a dusty road under a sun so bright and warm it felt alive. The air smelled of olive trees, wood smoke, and something else. Animals, spices, human sweat, the particular scent of a living community. But I wasn't standing in my own body. I was perceiving through the being's consciousness, seeing what it had seen, feeling what it had felt. The sensation was overwhelming. I had awareness of hundreds of dimensions of experience simultaneously: the temperature, the light quality, the emotional resonances of the people nearby, the subtle energetic fields that I never knew existed but now seemed as obvious as color. Where am I? I thought, and the being's response came immediately. When and where are the same question. This is Nazareth, in the year you would call 28 CE. I am showing you a day I remember clearly, a day that shaped everything that followed. I could see people, humans, walking along the road. Men in simple tunics, women with covered heads, children darting between adults. They looked so real, so immediate that I forgot for a moment that this was memory, not present experience. There, the being directed my attention to a group gathered near a large fig tree at a bend in the road. Do you see him? And I did. A man, 30s, weather-worn skin, dark hair, dressed no differently than dozens of others I could see in every direction. But there was something about him, something in the way people leaned toward him when he spoke, in the quality of attention he commanded without seeming to demand it. Jesus, I breathed, or thought I breathed. The one you call Jesus, yes, the being confirmed, but try to see him not as icon, not as divine exception, but as he was in this moment, a human being who had awakened to truths most of his people had forgotten. A teacher who understood the connection between heaven and earth, not as theology, but as lived reality. I watched as Jesus spoke to the small crowd. I couldn't hear his words. This was a memory of presence, not of specific language, but I could feel the effect he was having. Peace, recognition, a sense of homecoming in the faces around him. He taught that the kingdom of heaven was not a distant place, not a reward for good behavior or a punishment avoided through right belief. He taught that the divine presence was here, now, within and among all people. He taught that separation from the source was an illusion, a forgetting, not a punishment for sin. Tears were streaming down my face or down the face of my body back in the New Mexico arroyo. I could somehow maintain awareness of both places simultaneously, this ancient road and that desert wash, this luminous memory and my present moment of impossible experience. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because you have spent your life studying the historical facts while avoiding the spiritual truth. You have written about this man as though he were merely a political revolutionary or a wisdom teacher, categorizing him safely, keeping him at a distance, but you have never allowed yourself to consider what it would mean if he was right, if the things he taught were not metaphor but literal description of how reality actually works. I watched as Jesus placed his hand on an old woman's shoulder, saw her face transform from pain to peace in an instant. Not healing as magic trick, but healing as natural result of connection, of love made manifest, of recognition of the divine presence in another human being. He knew something you have forgotten, the being continued gently. He knew that every human carries the seed of divine consciousness. He knew that what you call miracles are simply the natural functioning of a reality in which consciousness and matter are not separate, but intimately connected. He knew that love is not sentiment, but actual creative force. But if that's true, I started, my mind reeling with implications. If that's true, then you are not separate from the divine. You never were. The emptiness you feel is not because you lack something external, but because you have forgotten something internal. You are not broken, Rebecca. You are sleeping, and it is time to wake up. The scene shifted. I saw Jesus sitting alone on a hillside at sunset, and suddenly I understood that the being, this luminous traveler, was there too, invisible to human eyes but present, watching, learning, witnessing. Did he know you were there? I asked. He did. We communicated, though not in the way you communicate with your voice. He asked me to remember, to carry witness, to help those who would come after understand that what he was demonstrating was not his uniqueness, but humanity's potential. He made me a promise that if ever I found someone asking the right questions, someone ready to receive, I would share what I had seen. And you think I'm ready? I asked. I think you have been ready for a long time, Rebecca, but you have been afraid of what readiness would require of you. The vision released me gently, and I found myself back in the arroyo, gasping as though I'd been underwater. The being of light sat patiently, its radiance unchanged, while my mind fought desperately to make sense of what I'd just experienced. "This isn't real," I heard myself say out loud. "I'm having some kind of neurological event, a seizure maybe, or a psychotic break. The stress of my mother's death, the loneliness, the existential crisis I've been having, this is my brain creating a coping mechanism." The being's light pulsed gently. And if that were true, would it change what you felt? Would it alter the truth of what you saw? But it wasn't real. It was, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't actual time travel. It wasn't genuine memory from 2,000 years ago. That's impossible. "Is it?" the being asked. "You are a historian. You know that memory exists in many forms: written records, oral traditions, archaeological evidence. Why is consciousness-to-consciousness transmission of experience any less valid than words on parchment?" I shook my head, feeling dizzy. "Because consciousness doesn't work that way. Brains are physical organs processing electrical signals. Memory is neurons firing in patterns. You can't just share someone else's memories. That's not how biology works." "The biology you understand," the corrected gently. "Perhaps your species has theories that are incomplete. Perhaps consciousness is not produced by the brain, but received by it, like a radio receives broadcasts it does not create. Perhaps everything you think you know about the nature of mind is as limited as ancient maps that showed the edge of the world." Even if I believed any of this, which I don't, you're contradicting everything Christianity teaches. Jesus wasn't just a wisdom teacher. He was the Son of God, the only Son, divine in a way no one else can be. What you're showing me, what you're saying, it's heresy. It's reducing something sacred to something common. The being's light grew softer, more compassionate. Is it reducing, Rebecca? Or is it elevating? The Jesus you were shown taught that the kingdom of heaven is within all people. He said, "You will do greater works than I have done." He called himself the Son of God, but also called others children of God. Which is heresy? Believing that divinity is a rare exception, or believing that it is the fundamental truth of all consciousness? But the church, 2,000 years of theology, billions of people who have believed what they were taught to believe, the being interjected. Often beautiful things, often helpful things, but also incomplete things. The institutional church built itself on the idea that Jesus was unreachable, unique, impossible to emulate. Because organizations that tell people they are divine and powerful do not keep people dependent. They set them free. I felt something crumbling inside me, some structure I'd built my entire worldview upon. So you're saying Christianity is wrong? I'm saying Christianity is incomplete. Like all religions, it contains seeds of truth wrapped in layers of human interpretation, cultural context, political necessity, and institutional preservation. The man I witnessed in Nazareth would not recognize much of what has been built in his name, but he would recognize the love. He would recognize the seeking. He would recognize you. How can I presume to know better than centuries of scholars, theologians, saints, people who have dedicated their entire lives to understanding these texts, these teachings? They understood what they had access to, the being replied. I have access to something they don't. Direct witness. I was there, Rebecca. I saw with eyes that perceive beyond your visible spectrum, heard with senses that detect beyond your audible range, felt with awareness that extends beyond your normal consciousness. I am not contradicting their devotion or their sincerity. I am simply offering a perspective they never had. But you're an alien, an extraterrestrial. Why should I trust your interpretation over human scholars? Because I am not offering interpretation, I am offering memory. And because the question is not whether you trust me, but whether you trust what you felt when you saw through my awareness. Did it feel true, Rebecca? In your heart, beneath all the rational objections your mind is constructing, did it feel true? I couldn't answer, because I knew what the answer was, and it terrified me. If I accept this, if I believe even a fraction of what you're showing me, then who am I? My entire career is built on historical methodology, on evidence-based research, on maintaining professional skepticism about supernatural claims. If I admit that there might be something beyond material causation, something that can't be measured or proven, I'll lose everything. My credibility, my reputation, everything I've worked for. You will lose one version of yourself, the being agreed. The version built on fear and limitations, but you will gain something much larger. Yourself as you actually are, not as you have tried to make yourself acceptable to a worldview that was always too small for you. I'll be laughed at, called crazy, dismissed. By some, yes. By others, you will be recognized. The question is, would you rather be respected for being something you're not, or criticized for becoming who you truly are? Why me? The words burst out of me with more force than I intended. I'm nobody. I'm a mid-level teacher at a prep school in New Mexico. I'm divorced, lonely, struggling with depression. I barely get out of bed some days. I'm not special. I'm not chosen. I'm certainly not the person who should be receiving cosmic revelations from time-traveling light beings. The being's light grew warmer, and I felt something like a smile, though it had no mouth to smile with. Rebecca, do you know why Jesus chose fishermen and tax collectors as his closest students? Not because they were educated or spiritually advanced, but because they were humble enough to admit they didn't have all the answers. The broken, the struggling, the lost, these are the ones most likely to actually listen because they know their current way isn't working. But I don't have anything to offer. No platform, no influence, no... You have the most important thing, a genuine question. You have been truly asking, not performing asking. Your soul has been crying out for truth, not for comfort or validation, but for actual truth regardless of the cost. That desperation, that authenticity, that is what opens the door. If what you're showing me is real, then I've wasted my entire life. 42 years of running from the one thing that actually matters. All those years of shutting down my intuition, my spiritual feelings, my sense of something more. My mother tried to show me, in her quiet way. I dismissed her as weak, as someone who couldn't face reality with crutches. And now she's dead, and I can never tell her. I can never. My voice broke completely. The tears I'd been holding back since my mother's funeral finally came in full force, racking sobs that shook my whole body. The being moved closer. I felt its presence more than saw it, a warmth that surrounded me without touching me. "Your mother knows," it communicated softly. "Death is not what you think it is. It is not ending, but transition. Not loss, but transformation. Her consciousness continues, and it is proud of you. So proud, because you are finally asking the questions she always wanted you to ask, but didn't know how to guide you toward." "I failed her. I failed myself." "You cannot fail a journey. You can only take different paths, and every path, even the ones that feel like mistakes, brings you to where you need to be. You needed to go through intellectual rigor. You needed to exhaust rational materialism. You needed to discover its limitations from the inside, so that when truth beyond materialism appeared, you would recognize it not as fantasy, but as a missing piece." "When David left me," I said, my voice raw and broken, "he told me he hadn't known he could feel that deeply for another person. He said being with Melissa made him feel alive in a way he'd never felt with me. And I realized I'd never felt that way either. Not with him, not with anyone, not even with myself. I've been numb for so long, disconnected, going through the motions of being human without actually feeling human. And the worst part is I did it to myself. I chose safety over truth. I chose intellectual control over emotional vulnerability. I chose to live in my head because living in my heart was too scary." The tears were flowing freely now, years of suppressed grief and loneliness and existential terror pouring out of me. "And now you're telling me that all humans have divine consciousness within them? That I could have been connected to something infinite and loving and true this entire time? That I didn't have to be so alone?" "Yes," the being said simply. "Then I've been a fool, a coward. I've wasted the gift of life, the gift of consciousness, the gift of—" "Stop." The word was gentle but firm. "Guilt is just another frequency that keeps you trapped. Self-recrimination is another form of separation. You are here now, Rebecca. This moment, this choice. Everything that came before brought you here. Do not poison your awakening with regret over the sleeping." I looked up at the luminous being through tear-blurred eyes. "I don't know how to be afraid. I don't know how to trust something I can't prove. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've trained myself to be for 40 decades. "Then let me show you," the being said. "Not with words or visions this time. Let me show you with direct experience. Are you willing?" I took a shuddering breath, wiped my face, and nodded. "Look at your hands," the being instructed. I held them up in the golden light, turning them over. My hands. 42-year-old hands, showing the first signs of age. Nothing special about them. "Now look differently. Soften your gaze. Don't try to see. Allow yourself to perceive." I didn't understand the distinction, but I tried anyway. I relaxed my eyes, let them unfocus slightly, stopped trying to make sense of what I was looking at, and just observed. And then I saw it. Around my hands, extending perhaps an inch beyond my skin, was a faint shimmer. Like heat waves rising from asphalt in summer, but more defined, more present. It moved with my hands, pulsing gently, alive. "What is that?" I whispered. "Your energy field. The electromagnetic presence generated by your consciousness inhabiting physical form. Every living thing has this. You've had it your entire life and never knew to look for it." I stared at the shimmer in wonder. It was undeniable. I was seeing something that shouldn't exist, according to everything I'd ever learned, but there it was, as real as my fingers. "Now watch." the being said. Its luminous form extended what might be called an arm, bringing its hand close to mine without touching. The golden light from its form flowed toward my hand, and where the two energy fields met, there was a visible interaction. The shimmer around my hand brightened, became more vibrant, as though fed by the being's presence. "You're feeling warmth, yes?" it asked. I was. A gentle heat that had nothing to do with temperature, spreading from my hand up my arm, filling my chest with a sensation that was simultaneously physical and emotional. Comfort, peace, safety, love. "This is how healing works," the being explained. "Not magic, not miracle, energy interaction. When Jesus touched the sick, he was doing what I just did, but with far greater mastery. He could perceive the disruptions in a person's energy field and correct them with his own consciousness. He was showing what becomes possible when you understand that thought, emotion, and physical matter are all expressions of the same fundamental force." My entire arm was tingling now, and I realized with shock that the chronic pain I'd had in my right shoulder, pain I'd been ignoring for months, was completely gone. "You healed my shoulder," I said in amazement. "No, I showed your body's energy field its optimal pattern, and your body healed itself. The capacity was always there. Most humans just never activate it because they don't know it exists. The desert sand around us is receptive. Watch what happens when consciousness focuses intention." I watched as the being's light concentrated into a narrow beam directed at a patch of sand about 3 feet from where we sat. The sand began to move, swirling gently at first, then more deliberately. It rose into the air in a spiral pattern, and as I watched in absolute astonishment, organized itself into a perfect sphere about the size of a baseball, suspended in mid-air, rotating slowly. Matter is not solid. It is energy organized in specific patterns. Consciousness is also energy, operating at different frequencies. When consciousness concentrates intention clearly enough, it can influence how matter organizes itself. This is what Jesus did when he multiplied loaves and fishes, not creation from nothing, but reorganization of existing matter into different configurations through focused consciousness. The sand sphere gently returned to the ground, spreading back into its natural state as though nothing had happened. "Now you try," the being said. "I can't." "You can. Not on the same scale. You haven't trained this ability. But you can move a single grain. Choose one. Focus on it. Don't try to force it. Simply hold the clear intention that it will move, and then let go of attachment to whether it does." I stared at the sand until my eyes hurt, trying to identify a single grain. Finally, I picked one that caught the light slightly differently. I focused everything I had on it. "Move. Please move." Nothing happened. "You're straining," the being observed. "You're trying to push it with your mind. That's not how it works. Think of it like this. If you love someone and want them to come to you, do you shove them mentally? Or do you open your heart and trust they will feel the invitation?" I softened my approach. Instead of trying to force the grain of sand to move, I imagined it responding to my consciousness the way a flower turns toward the sun. Naturally, easily, without coercion. The grain trembled. It was barely perceptible, but I saw it. The tiny grain shifted position, moved perhaps a millimeter, and I gasped. "I did it! I actually—" "You did. A millimeter today. In time, with practice, more. But the principle is the same, whether moving a grain of sand, or healing a body, or manifesting circumstances. Consciousness shapes reality. You experience time as linear, past behind you, future ahead, the present as a thin moving point between them. But that's not how time actually functions. It's more like everything existing simultaneously and consciousness choosing which frequency to tune into. I don't understand. I can show you better than explain. Remember something from your childhood, something specific. Don't just think about it, fully remember it. Let yourself be there. I thought of a moment when I was 7 years old, summer, my mother's garden, the smell of tomato plants, the buzz of bees, sunlight through leaves. You're there now, aren't you? In this moment, sitting in the New Mexico desert at night, you are also simultaneously there, age 7, in that garden. The past isn't gone, you're accessing it right now. I realized with a shock that the being was right. I wasn't just remembering, I was experiencing it, both times at once. Now imagine something that hasn't happened yet. Imagine yourself tomorrow morning, waking up in your bed. Let it be vivid. I did. I could see my bedroom, feel the sheets, smell the coffee I would make. That future isn't distant. It's as accessible as the past because all of it exists now in an eternal present that your consciousness moves through like someone walking through rooms of a house. Jesus understood this. That's how he could predict events, how he could know things before they occurred. He was perceiving the fuller structure of time, not bound by the illusion of linear sequence. My mind was reeling, but it means free will and destiny are both real. Multiple potential futures exist simultaneously, and your consciousness chooses which one to actualize through your decisions in each moment. Jesus was teaching people to choose, to create the future they wanted, rather than sleepwalking into the future created by unconscious patterns. Put your hand on your heart, the being instructed. I did. Now think of someone you love genuinely, not romantic love necessarily, any kind of authentic love. I thought of my mother. Despite our distance, despite everything, I had loved her. I still loved her. Feel what happens in your chest, that warmth, that expansion. That's not metaphor, it's actual energetic frequency. Your heart is generating an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond your body. And when you feel love, that field becomes coherent, organized, powerful. I could feel it, a real physical sensation of warmth and fullness. Now think of something that makes you fearful or angry. I thought about my divorce, about David's words, about feeling abandoned and insufficient. The warmth in my chest contracted, became tight, almost painful. That's fear frequency, lower, chaotic, constricting. You felt the difference, yes? I nodded. Love and fear are not just emotions, they're energetic states with measurable effects. When Jesus taught love one another, he wasn't being poetic or moral, he was giving technical instruction for operating at the frequency that heals, creates, connects. Love frequency opens, fear frequency closes. In every moment, you're choosing one or the other, and that choice is literally shaping your reality. I sat with my hand on my heart, feeling the contrast between the two states, understanding for the first time that feelings weren't just internal experiences, but forces that extended beyond my skin, affecting everything around me. You've prayed before, the being asked. When I was younger, not for years. How did you pray? I thought back. I would ask God for things. Please help me. Please fix this. Please don't let that happen. Like petitioning a king. That form of prayer reinforces the belief that you are separate from divine source, powerless, dependent on external force that may or may not grant your request. It operates from frequency of lack. I don't have this thing. Please give it to me. And what does that frequency manifest? More lack, I said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. Exactly. Now try something different. Think of something you want, not something material, but something in your life you wish were different. I thought about my loneliness, my isolation. Good. Now, don't pray from, "I'm alone, please send me connection." Instead, feel gratitude for connection as though it already exists. Feel thankful for the loving friendships, the meaningful relationships, the deep companionship you have in your life. But I don't have those things. That would be lying. You're not lying to God. You're aligning your frequency with the reality you want to experience. You're tuning your consciousness to the frequency of connection rather than the frequency of isolation. Try it. I closed my eyes and imagined what it would feel like to have close friends, meaningful connections, people who really saw and understood me. I tried to feel grateful for these relationships as though they were already real. Something shifted in my chest, not dramatic, but real. A small lightening, a tiny expansion. This is how Jesus prayed, the being explained. He gave thanks before the manifestation appeared because he understood that gratitude is the frequency that attracts what you're grateful for. He operated from faith so complete it became reality. Not blind belief, but conscious application of universal principles. I opened my eyes, seeing the being with entirely new understanding. These weren't miracles, they were technologies. They were systems that operated according to specific principles, principles that anyone could learn if they understood the underlying nature of consciousness and reality. Everything I've shown you tonight, the being said, Jesus demonstrated 2,000 years ago, not to prove he was God, but to show what humans can become when they remember their true nature. The being's light pulsed gently, and I felt its attention settle on me with renewed intensity. You're ready now for what I came to share, the memories, the truths I witnessed. Are you willing to receive? I nodded, no longer fighting, no longer trying to understand with my rational mind. I was simply open. Then close your eyes, and I will show you what I saw. The vision was softer this time, less disorienting. I found myself once again perceiving through the being's consciousness, standing on a hillside overlooking the small town of Nazareth. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple. Jesus was sitting alone, his back against an olive tree, looking out over the valley. He appeared tired, not physically exhausted, but carrying a weight that had nothing to do with his body. I felt the being's presence approach, invisible to human eyes, but somehow sensed by the man under the tree. "You're troubled," the being communicated, though not with words. Jesus looked up, and though he couldn't see the being with his physical eyes, he perceived it clearly with other senses. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "They don't understand," he said aloud, his voice carrying a mix of frustration and compassion. "I show them healing, and they call it miracle. I teach them about the kingdom within, and they search the skies for external kingdoms. I tell them they have the same divine spark I carry, and they insist I'm different, special, impossible to emulate." "Why do you think they resist?" the being asked. Jesus picked up a handful of dirt, letting it sift through his fingers. "Because it's terrifying. To understand that you are divine means accepting responsibility for your creation. It's easier to believe in distant God who controls everything, easier to blame fate or deity for your suffering than to recognize your own role in manifesting it. I'm not teaching them to worship God. I'm teaching them to remember they are expressions of God." I felt the being's deep compassion for this human teacher who understood truths his community wasn't ready to hear. "Will they ever understand?" the being asked. Jesus looked at the setting sun for a long moment. "Some will. Not in my lifetime, perhaps, but seeds planted in consciousness take time to grow.
There will come an era when humanity is ready to remember, when the veils thin, when the consciousness of the planet shifts. That's when the teachings will truly be understood, not as religious doctrine, but as operating manual for conscious creation. And until then, I teach love. Because even if they misunderstand everything else, love is the frequency that heals all misunderstanding. Love is the one truth that cannot be completely distorted. The scene shifted. I was now watching Jesus place his hands on a woman's head. She had been bent over, her spine curved with years of pain. The crowd around them was silent, watching. But through the being's perception, I could see what the crowd couldn't: the energy. Jesus' hands glowed with coherent, organized light frequency. The woman's energy field was chaotic, disrupted, especially along her spine. Where Jesus' hands contacted her, the light from his field flowed into hers, bringing order to chaos, harmony to discord. It took perhaps 2 minutes. Then the woman slowly straightened, gasping as her spine unlocked, her shoulders rolled back, her entire posture transforming. The crowd erupted in amazement, calling it miracle. But through the being's understanding, I saw it clearly. Jesus had perceived the energetic disruption, matched his frequency to the pattern of perfect health, and allowed his coherent field to entrain hers back to optimal functioning. Not supernatural intervention, natural law perfectly applied. This is what all humans can do, the being whispered to me across 2,000 years. He was showing them their potential, but they chose to worship the demonstration rather than learning the principle. Another shift. Jesus was teaching a small group, using the metaphor of a seed planted in soil. The seed doesn't wonder if it will grow. It doesn't pray to become a plant. It simply is the pattern of the plant, compressed in small form, and when conditions are right, the pattern unfolds into manifestation. This is how prayer works. You are the seed of what you desire. Your consciousness holds the pattern. Your belief provides the conditions. Your faith allows the unfolding. One of his students asked, "But Master, what if I believe I will be healed and I'm not? What if I pray with complete faith and nothing changes?" Jesus looked at the man with infinite patience. Are you feeling the gratitude of being healed or the desperation of needing healing? Are you operating from frequency of wholeness or frequency of brokenness? Your consciousness cannot hold two patterns simultaneously. If you pray, "Please heal me," you are affirming the reality of sickness. But if you feel thanksgiving for perfect health as though it already exists, your energy reorganizes around that pattern. Through the being's perception, I understood that this wasn't positive thinking or wishful fantasy. Jesus was teaching actual mechanics of how consciousness shapes material reality, principles that would take humanity 2,000 more years to begin rediscovering through quantum physics and consciousness studies. The vision brought me to what felt like a pivotal moment. Jesus was walking with his closest students through a wheat field. They were asking him the same question different ways. "What makes you different? How can we become like you?" Jesus stopped walking and turned to face them with an expression of deep love mixed with frustration. "You already are like me. That's what I've been trying to show you. The only difference is that I remember what you've forgotten. I am awake and you are dreaming. But the dreamer and the awakened one are made of the same consciousness, the same divine spark. When I say, 'I am the way,' I'm not claiming exclusive status. I'm saying, become like me. Remember what I remember. Wake up as I have woken up." One of the students, Thomas, shook his head. "But you perform miracles. You heal the sick, calm storms, know things before they happen. We're just ordinary men." "No," Jesus said firmly. "There is no such thing as ordinary. Every human is divine consciousness choosing temporary limitation to have specific experiences. You appear ordinary only because you believe in your limitations more strongly than you believe in your divine nature. I have simply reversed that equation. I believe in divine nature so completely that limitations become optional." "So we could do what you do?" another student asked. "You will do greater works than these," Jesus said. And through the being's perception, I felt the absolute certainty in his words. He believed it completely. He knew it as fact. Not because you're special, but because you will have the advantage of time, of accumulated knowledge, of a world that has evolved beyond its current state. The consciousness of humanity is rising, slowly but rising. There will come a time when what I demonstrate alone will be what many demonstrate together. The final vision showed something I hadn't expected. Jesus in conversation with the being itself. They were on a hillside at night, the stars impossibly bright overhead. Jesus was asking questions. "How many worlds have you visited? How many civilizations have you witnessed?" "Hundreds," the being replied. "Thousands if you count brief observations." "And do they all struggle as we struggle? Does consciousness forget itself on every world?" "In different ways, yes. Limitation is the nature of physical form. Consciousness must forget its infinite nature to have experience of individuality, of separation, of choice. Otherwise, there is only unified awareness, beautiful, perfect, and static. Growth requires forgetting, so there can be journey of remembering." Jesus nodded slowly. "So this isn't punishment, this amnesia we're born into?" "No, it's design, it's gift. You cannot appreciate light without experiencing darkness. You cannot choose love unless fear is also option. Earth is school, and forgetting is the curriculum that makes learning possible." "And my role?" Jesus asked. "What am I really doing here?" "You're planting remembrance. You're demonstrating that the amnesia can be overcome while still in physical form. You're showing that humans don't have to wait for death to remember their divine nature. This is revolutionary. Most worlds require many incarnations, long evolutionary cycles. You're attempting to accelerate the process through teaching and demonstration." Jesus smiled. Attempting being the key word. They're not quite getting it. "Not yet, but seeds you plant tonight will flower centuries from now, maybe millennia. Your teaching will be distorted, yes, used in ways you never intended. But the core truth, love is the fundamental force. Consciousness creates reality. Humans are divine. That truth is indestructible. It will persist through all the distortions, waiting to be rediscovered when humanity is ready." "Will I live to see them understand?" The being was quiet for a moment, and I felt deep sadness pass through its consciousness. "No, you will face opposition. Those who profit from keeping humans powerless will see you as threat. Your physical life will be short." "I know. I've seen it in dreams. But death is not ending, is it?" "No. Consciousness continues. And in your case, your death will paradoxically amplify your teaching. They will tell the story. The seed will spread." "Then it's enough," Jesus said, looking up at the stars. "If even one person, 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, understands what I came to teach and wakes up to their divine nature, it's enough." The vision released me, and I was back in the arroyo, tears streaming down my face. He knew. He knew he would be killed, knew his teaching would be distorted, and he did it anyway. Because love that powerful doesn't calculate cost, it simply gives. I looked up at this luminous traveler who had walked beside Jesus, who had witnessed truths that had been lost or hidden or misunderstood for 2,000 years. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because it's time. The era Jesus spoke of, when humanity would be ready to truly understand, is beginning. Consciousness on your planet is accelerating. More people are questioning, seeking, awakening. The veils are thinning, and beings like me who carry direct witness to what was taught, we're coming forward, not to create new religion, but to help dissolve old misunderstandings, to remind humanity what Jesus was actually saying. You are divine. Wake up. I sat in silence for what might have been minutes or hours. Time had become fluid, irrelevant. The being's light remained steady, patient, while something fundamental reorganized itself inside me. "I believe you," I heard myself say, and the words felt like surrender and liberation simultaneously. "I don't fully understand it. I couldn't explain it to anyone else in any way that would make sense. But I believe what you've shown me. Not because I want to, not because it makes me feel better, but because it feels more true than anything I've ever called true before." The tears that came next weren't sad or happy, they were cleansing. Every year of suppression, every decade of carefully maintained skepticism, every moment of shutting down my intuition and denying my spiritual hunger, all of it was releasing through my body in waves of profound letting go. I cried for my younger self who had felt something in churches and been taught to dismiss it as wishful thinking. I cried for my mother who had tried to share her simple faith and encountered my intellectual condescension. I cried for David and for our hollow marriage built on mutual numbness. I cried for every student I'd taught about Jesus while carefully draining all spiritual meaning from the historical facts. But beneath the grief was something else: relief. Deep, oceanic relief. I wasn't broken. I wasn't crazy. The emptiness I'd felt wasn't because I was defective, but because I'd been trying to live in too small a container. The next morning, because eventually the night did end and the being did fade back into wherever beings of light reside, promising to return if I needed guidance, I woke in my bed with no clear memory of how I'd gotten there. But I knew it had been real. The knowing was written into my cells, into my consciousness, unchangeable. I started small. I sat in my bed and held my hands up, softening my gaze the way the being had taught me. And there it was, the shimmer, the energy field, undeniable in the morning light. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Okay, it's real." I placed my hands on my chest, on my heart, and thought about love. Not any specific person, just the frequency of love itself. Warmth bloomed under my palms, spreading through my ribcage, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than emptiness in that space. Over the next days, things I'd never noticed before became impossible to miss. I could sense people's emotional states before they spoke. I would know the phone was going to ring seconds before it did. I would think of someone and they would text me minutes later. At school, I looked at my students differently. Where I'd seen bored teenagers, I now saw young consciousness struggling to remember itself through the fog of social conditioning and hormonal chaos. My teaching changed without me consciously deciding to change it. I started asking different questions, speaking from a different place. One student, Maya, stayed after class. "Dr. Chen, are you okay? You seem different." "I'm more okay than I've been in a long time," I told her. "I'm just remembering some things I'd forgotten." The changes were subtle at first, then increasingly undeniable. My chronic shoulder pain that the being had healed that first night never returned. My insomnia resolved itself. I slept deeply, dreaming vivid, instructive dreams. My energy returned. Food tasted better. Colors looked brighter. But more than physical changes, there were practical ones. I received an unexpected email from my department chair offering me a role on a curriculum committee I'd wanted to join for years. A neighbor I'd barely spoken to invited me to a women's meditation group. My Aunt Maria called out of nowhere, and we had the first real conversation we'd ever had. It was as though the universe had been waiting for me to shift frequency, and once I did, everything else could rearrange itself to match. I started a morning practice. Not prayer as I'd understood it, not petition or supplication, but alignment. I would sit quietly, place my hand on my heart, and feel gratitude for things as though they were already real. Thank you for deep, meaningful friendships. Thank you for work that feels purposeful. Thank you for vitality and health. Thank you for spiritual connection that sustains me." At first, it felt like I was lying, but I remembered what the being taught about frequency, about consciousness creating reality, and I persisted. Within 2 weeks, I noticed I was meeting the reality I'd been feeling grateful for. The friendships were forming, the work was becoming more meaningful, the spiritual connection was constant. I looked at myself in the mirror one morning and didn't recognize the person looking back. Not because I looked different physically, but because the energy was different. The tightness around my eyes was gone. There was softness in my expression that hadn't been there before. "Who am I?" I asked my reflection. And an answer came, not from my rational mind, but from somewhere deeper. Your consciousness having a temporary human experience. Your divine spark choosing to play in physical form. You're exactly what Jesus was teaching about, human being remembering its divine nature. It wasn't Rebecca Chen, PhD, historian, divorcee, lonely teacher. It was consciousness itself, expressing as all those temporary identities but never limited to them. 3 weeks after the encounter, I had a dream. Jesus was in it, but not as religious icon, as the man I'd seen through the being's memories. He smiled at me. "Now you understand. Now you can teach, not by preaching, but by living. Your students are watching. Your colleagues are watching. They're seeing the change in you, and it's making them curious. That's all transformation requires. Someone living differently, consistently enough that others start asking questions." I woke knowing what my role was. Not to start a religion or gather followers, but to embody the principles I've been shown. To teach ancient history with new depth. To treat my students as divine consciousness, temporarily wearing teenage disguises. To demonstrate that awakening is possible without drama, without abandoning ordinary life. I returned to work on a Monday morning and taught my class about the historical Jesus, but differently. Jesus of Nazareth was a first-century Jewish teacher who taught that the kingdom of heaven was not a distant place, but a present reality within human consciousness. He demonstrated that physical healing, material manifestation, and conscious creation are natural abilities that emerge when humans remember their divine nature. His life was not meant to create dependence on him as unique savior, but to show what every human can become. Some students looked confused. Some looked intrigued. Maya looked like something had clicked into place. After class, she approached me again. "Dr. Chen, do you really believe that? That we have divine nature?" I looked at this 17-year-old girl, this ancient consciousness temporarily experiencing adolescence, and smiled. "I know it, Maya, and one day you'll know it too."
The transformation wasn't instant, but it was steady. My life didn't suddenly become perfect. I still had bills to pay, classes to teach, ordinary human problems to navigate. But the texture of existence had fundamentally changed. My history classes became something different. I still taught the facts, the dates, the archaeological evidence, but I also taught the deeper patterns, how spiritual movements arise when consciousness collectively shifts, how individuals like Jesus emerge when humanity needs demonstration of next evolutionary step, how religion institutionalizes awakening until it sometimes obscures the very truth it was meant to preserve. My colleagues noticed. Dr. Stevens, who taught philosophy, started having lunch with me regularly. We would discuss consciousness, the nature of reality, the intersection of science and spirituality. He told me about his own experiences of expanded awareness during a near-death experience he'd had 20 years earlier and never fully processed. "You've given me permission to talk about this," he said. "For 2 decades, I've kept it secret, afraid of being mocked. But watching you speak openly about spiritual truth with such groundedness, it makes me braver." The women's meditation group my neighbor had invited me to became a profound source of connection. 7 women, ranging from their 30s to 70s, meeting Tuesday evenings to practice various forms of meditation and discuss spiritual growth. No dogma, no required beliefs, just genuine seekers supporting each other. I shared my encounter with them,
Not all the details, not the specifics about Jesus, but the core truth. I had met a being of light who showed me that consciousness is fundamental, that humans are divine, that love is literal technology for healing and creation. No one laughed. Several cried. 2 others shared their own experiences of non-ordinary reality that they'd kept hidden for years. "We're not crazy," one woman said, her voice shaking with relief. "This is real. Other people are experiencing it too." My relationship with Jennifer, my daughter from my marriage to David, underwent complete transformation. She was 19, in college, still angry about the divorce and distant from both her parents. But one weekend, she came home to visit, and within an hour of being around me, she noticed the change. "Mom, what happened to you? You're like lighter, happier. What's different?" I told her a version of the story she could hear, not about aliens or Jesus, but about spiritual awakening, about learning to live from a deeper place, about discovering that human beings are more than just biological machines stumbling through meaningless existence. She listened in silence, then said, "Can you teach me? Whatever you learned, can you teach me?" We started having weekly video calls where I shared the principles. Consciousness creates reality. Love is fundamental force. We're divine consciousness having temporary human experience. I taught her about energy perception, about gratitude as manifestation technology, about prayer as alignment rather than petition. Within a month, her whole demeanor changed. She was sleeping better, feeling less anxious, experiencing synchronicities that amazed her. She sent me a text one night. "Mom, I finally understand why you married Dad and why it didn't work. You were both trying to live from your heads. Now you're living from your heart. I want to live from my heart too." Word spread quietly. I didn't advertise or promote anything, but people started reaching out. Former students, parents of current students, friends of friends. People who had heard that Dr. Chen had experienced something and had wisdom to share. I started hosting small gatherings at my house. Not religious services, consciousness development circles. We would meditate together, practice energy perception, discuss spiritual principles, and share experiences. Some weeks we had 5 people. Some weeks we had 20. One evening, a woman named Patricia, late 60s, deeply Catholic her whole life, stood up with tears streaming down her face. "For 68 years, I've been terrified that I'm not good enough for God, that I'm a sinner who might not make it to heaven. But tonight, practicing what you taught about feeling our own divine nature, I felt God inside me, not watching me from heaven, judging me, inside me, part of me. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid." That's when I fully understood my role. Not to convert anyone, not to start a movement, but simply to help people remember what Jesus actually taught. You are divine. You were never separate. You are already home.
Rebecca's journey from skeptical academic to awakened teacher reveals something crucial that you need to understand right now. You have been taught lies about your own nature, not because the teachers were malicious, but because they themselves had forgotten. The institutions that claim to know God, whether churches, temples, academic systems, or cultural traditions, have built themselves on a fundamental misunderstanding: the idea that human beings are separate from the divine, powerless except through external intermediaries, broken and needing salvation from outside themselves. Jesus of Nazareth never taught that. What he taught, what the luminous traveler witnessed and shared with Rebecca, is far more extraordinary and far more empowering than anything religious institutions have preserved. He taught that the kingdom of heaven is within you, not metaphorically, literally. Your consciousness is divine consciousness, temporarily experiencing limitation in order to have the journey of remembering its infinite nature. He taught that the works he did, you will do also, not because he was lowering himself to your level, but because he was showing you what your level actually is. You are not small. You are not powerless. You are not separate from the creative force that sustains all reality. He taught that love is not sentiment, but technology, the fundamental frequency that heals bodies, manifests circumstances, transforms material reality. When you operate from love frequency consistently, you access abilities that your current worldview calls impossible. Now you have a choice. You can close this video and return to the comfortable fiction that you're just a biological machine, that consciousness is just brain activity, that your life happens to you rather than through you. That's safe, that's familiar, that's what almost everyone around you believes. Or you can do what Rebecca did. You can start questioning the limitations you've accepted. You can begin experimenting with consciousness as creative force. You can practice gratitude as manifestation instead of supplication as prayer. You can look for the energy fields around your own hands. You can choose love frequency consciously and watch how reality responds. If you want more stories like this, testimonies that bridge ancient wisdom and modern awakening, that challenge religious dogma while honoring spiritual truth, subscribe to Stories of Light and activate the bell. Share your experiences in the comments. Have you ever felt divine presence within you? Have you experienced moments when thought seemed to directly shape reality? Have you sensed that you're more than just physical body, that consciousness extends beyond brain, that love is actual force rather than just feeling? You are not alone in these experiences. Thousands are awakening simultaneously. This is not individual phenomenon. This is collective shift. This is the era Jesus spoke of, when humanity would be ready to understand what he actually taught. You are the second coming, not because you're Jesus, but because you're finally becoming what Jesus came to show you that you are: divine consciousness, awake and creating consciously in physical form. Remember,
This story is a fictional spiritual narrative inspired by themes of hope, light, and human potential. It does not claim historical or religious accuracy regarding Jesus Christ, early Christianity, or any theological doctrines. The character of the light being and its accounts of ancient Nazareth are entirely imaginative creations meant to explore universal spiritual principles such as love, consciousness, and personal transformation. This narrative is not intended to replace, contradict, or diminish any religious tradition, but rather to inspire reflection on the nature of faith, awakening, and the divine spark many traditions teach exists within all people. The views expressed are those of fictional characters and are presented for inspirational and contemplative purposes only. Readers are encouraged to approach this story as metaphorical exploration rather than doctrinal statement.